The Great Depression stands as the harshest economic collapse in modern history. In the span of a few short years, people went from the glittering parties, the jazz music, and the wealth of the roaring 20s to losing their life savings, lining up for bread, and facing hardship on a scale no one could have imagined. And this wasn't a problem confined to America alone. Its effects rippled across the globe, ultimately contributing to the onset of World War II. But what triggered such a catastrophic collapse, and what lessons can history teach us? The story begins in 1918. World War I had just ended, and American soldiers were returning home, victorious but exhausted. The relief of being back on familiar soil was palpable. During the war, women had stepped into roles in the workforce for the first time. And now, with men returning, the economy surged in a post-war boom. This financial upswing, paired with a cultural shift toward modernity and freedom, gave rise to the era famously known as the Roaring '20s. In Detroit, Michigan, a man named Henry Ford was changing the way people thought about transportation. The Ford Model T had taken the country by storm, and to meet the overwhelming demand, Ford introduced the moving assembly line. This innovation slashed production costs, bringing the price of a car down from $780 in 1910 to just $290 by 1924, making automobiles accessible to the masses for the first time. By 1927, the 15th millionth Model T rolled off the line. Ford famously proclaimed, "You get a car. You get a car, everyone gets a car." Other industries quickly adopted similar assembly line methods, mass-producing radios, washing machines, and vacuum cleaners. With the rise of mass production and advertising amplified by the radio, the age of consumerism was born. Everyone wanted the newest, most desirable products. To fuel this demand, banks began offering credit more freely, allowing people to purchase goods they hadn't yet earned the money for. Life felt abundant. People were celebrating, dancing to jazz, and embracing a newfound social liberation. Prohibition had begun in 1920, but for this generation, it seemed almost irrelevant. Parties grew wilder, social norms loosened, and Wall Street became the place to be. From 1921 to 1929, the U.S. stock market soared sixfold, driven by the post-war boom, easy credit, and insatiable consumer demand. As news of these returns spread, everyone wanted in. Ordinary citizens poured their life savings into the market, some even taking out loans to invest, further driving stock prices higher. As long as people believed there was no ceiling on stock prices, caution was ignored. Fundamentals were disregarded, and speculation created a fragile bubble that would soon burst. Although stock prices were reaching new highs, something wasn't right. By the mid-1920s, the economy and demand for products had slowed drastically. With Europe still recovering from the aftermath of World War I and few countries being able to afford the new consumer items, global trade was stalling. This didn't matter, as people were still overwhelmingly optimistic and expected the stock market would continue to see record yearly performances each year. Extreme greed and unrealistic fantasy filled the air. With margin, people could even buy stocks for only 40 to 10% of the actual stock price and then pay off their loan when the stock sold for large profits. "I would like to take out a loan." "Sure, what for? A house, a business, a farm to buy stocks?" "Fine by me, here you go." By 1929, 40% of US consumer debt was being used to purchase stocks. And in that same year, the US had just elected a new president, Herbert Hoover, who famously said, "We in America today are nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land. The poor house is vanishing from among us." To many people, a skyrocketing stock market was a sign of a healthy, booming economy. But things were about to take a dark turn. Catastrophe would hit. On October the 24th, 1929, a day that became known as Black Thursday, the stock market would see heavy liquidation with a record 12.9 million shares sold, and the entire stock market fell 11%. This day marked the beginning of the Great Depression, and the following week there would be Black Tuesday, where the market fell 12% with a record-breaking 16.4 million shares sold. Eventually, in the span of 2 weeks, stocks had lost about a third of their value. People who had borrowed money to invest were crushed, and many people lost their life savings. However, the worst was yet to come. The common belief is that the stock market crash caused the Great Depression, but this is not entirely true. The stock market triggered a recession, but the real cause of the Great Depression was that many banks had extended too many bad loans and were speculating too much. At this time, many US banks were small and independent shops that lent out a large amount of their assets to people for stock market speculation. As the stock market crashed, these banks went out of business overnight. There was no deposit insurance at the time, so if a local bank closed its doors, people lost their money. With headlines of many banks shutting down, people began to panic and pull their savings from healthy banks. This created bank runs on otherwise healthy banks that had to turn around and try to get all their customers' money all at once. Although stock prices were reaching new heights, something felt off. By the mid-1920s, the economic boom had begun to slow, and the demand for products was no longer climbing as it once had. Across the Atlantic, Europe was still reeling from the aftermath of World War I, and many countries simply couldn't afford the new consumer goods pouring out of American factories. Global trade was stalling, but people in the United States remained overwhelmingly optimistic. They believed the stock market would continue its record-breaking climb year after year. Extreme greed and a sense of unrealistic fantasy filled the air. With margin buying, investors could purchase stocks for as little as 10 to 40% of their actual value, paying off the remainder once the stock sold for a profit. Banks were willing to lend almost anyone money to invest in the market. Want a loan? Sure. For what? A house, a business, a farm, or maybe just to buy stocks? Fine. Here you go. By 1929, roughly 40% of US consumer debt was being used to buy stocks. That same year, the nation elected a new president, Herbert Hoover, who optimistically proclaimed, "We in America today are nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land. The poorhouse is vanishing from among us." To many, a soaring stock market seemed proof that the economy was booming. But then disaster struck. On October 24, 1929, a day that would be remembered as Black Thursday, panic set in on Wall Street. Heavy liquidation flooded the market. 12.9 million shares changed hands, and the stock market fell 11%. The following week brought Black Tuesday, when 16.4 million shares were sold, and the market fell another 12%. Within 2 weeks, stocks had lost about a third of their value. Those who had borrowed money to invest were devastated. Life savings evaporated overnight. Yet the stock market crash alone did not cause the Great Depression. It was the trigger, yes, a catalyst for the coming recession, but the deeper causes ran far wider. Many banks had made reckless loans and engaged in speculation themselves. At the time, most US banks were small, independent institutions, often lending out large portions of their deposits to people investing in the stock market. When stocks crashed, these banks collapsed almost instantly. With no federal deposit insurance to protect their savings, ordinary Americans who had trusted these banks lost everything. Panic spread quickly. People rushed to withdraw their money from banks that were actually healthy, creating widespread bank runs. Banks scrambled to meet demands they could not possibly fulfill, and the financial system teetered on the edge of collapse. It wasn't until the start of World War II in 1939 that the Great Depression truly ended. It was only at this time that the unemployment rate fell below 10%, and the US saw vast stimulus to support war efforts. Economists still argue how much intervention is needed to solve an economic disaster and the effect of the New Deal program. Many of the lessons learned from the Great Depression are still used in the modern day, including the need for a small, stable amount of inflation to boost consumer spending and business investment, an increased role in government spending, and the assistance from the government to boost the economy when a recession occurs. By learning from the past, we can better understand our current economic system and see any potential dangerous parallels in the future. In the end, it was greed that drove people to believe that there was no price too high for a stock and made many banks take on bad loans. And just like all bubbles, an overinflated market always sees the same ending of a painful crash. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our Power of Economy channel for more economic videos just like this.